I am a former financial advisor. I spent 10 years as a university professor. I got my PhD at Kansas State University in personal financial planning. I retired from that career path this past May to found Crypto Goddess officially and expand my financial therapy practice. And financial therapy, I think for a lot of people is a term that raises a little bit of eyebrows, a little bit of questioning. What is a financial therapist? And a financial therapist is somebody who does work with those emotional, relational, and cognitive and behavioral aspects of the way we interact with our money. And one of the things I think is so interesting about digital assets and the way it intersects with financial therapy is that it represents such a great mindset shift in terms of investing and in terms of the way we approach our relationship with not only ourselves, but our money. For a lot of women, this week in particular has been difficult, depending on it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on. It's been a really rough week for women. And one of the things women have dealt with in the history of finances, we think back to the 1950s and things being very, idyllic, right? And then we have, a revolution and, then women start going into the workforce. But we still have those issues where we have the gender pay gap. We have, women who are clearly excellent investors, and there's research that backs that up, that we are really great investors and we tend to outperform men. But there is trouble when it comes to getting into those types of investing. And even more so when it comes to things like digital assets. And digital assets themselves, I think a lot of us really approach, and it depends on your level of familiarity with digital assets. And to be perfectly honest with you, I went through a divorce in 2019. And I wanted to find a big distraction, a really big distraction from that personal pain and grief I was feeling. I had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old at the time. Divorced in November of 2019. Pandemic hits, of course, March 2020. My kindergartner now is doing kindergarten on Zoom. I'm at home in a different home, a smaller home with 2 small children post-divorce. And I needed a distraction. And so I wanted to find the most complicated thing. I didn't want to make sourdough bread, even though it's delicious, but I wanted to find the most complicated thing to learn about so I could distract myself from the world. So I chose crypto. And let me tell you, when I started looking at crypto, my initial thought was, okay, Bitcoin. So let's learn about Bitcoin. What is Bitcoin? Is it some digital coin or whatever? And as I started learning about Bitcoin and crypto in general, what I came across were a lot of what I would describe as the crypto bro culture. So a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of male presence online that was not accessible or approachable. And I don't want to say that in a way to where men were discriminating against women, because that was not the case. It just was not female friendly. It was kind of over the top or way too bro-y, as we would call it. And it wasn't accessible. So I kind of put that in the back of my mind. And it was very difficult for me to start wrapping my head around some of these concepts. And I started thinking, I have a PhD in this. I teach personal finance for a living. If it is difficult for me to learn about this, holy heck, what is it like for everybody else? And as I started learning more about it, I started kind of testing things out in the classroom. I started having my personal finance students start using personal financial planning apps back in 2017. I was like, okay, so there's got to be a way to start kind of testing this, in real life. And what I started to find were my students were really open to it. But what I really started to find was my female students were particularly open to it. And as I started having those conversations with young females, we're talking to 18, 19, 20-year-olds, the recurring theme was, it seemed like it would be an easier way to be able to make money in the market. And I could see that. And it doesn't seem necessarily like it would be the easy way to do it, right? Because you can go to Robinhood and They got their own set of problems now, but you could go to Fidelity, you could open a Roth IRA, you could do all of these things relatively easily. But there was, at least in the women I talked to, the college-age women, there was this idea that it was somewhat more accessible. And so that really got me thinking about the differences in the accessibility and ease of entry into the financial system and the hurdles that women have faced over the years. And I think that is one of the most unique things about digital asset investing, is that hurdle, that barrier, is pretty well removed. Again, there's their own set of problems with this, as we've seen recently. We're in a ginormous, nuclear crypto winter. But what we're starting to see is women are starting to gain interest in crypto and digital assets. And I think, from a psychological perspective, from that emotional or relational perspective, it also opens up doors for careers, right? So now we've got, I remember seeing on LinkedIn, I wish I would have stored the statistics somewhere for this presentation. That would have been wise. But something like 70% of the new jobs out there that are being posted are crypto or blockchain related, which is wild, absolutely wild. And most of these jobs are unfortunately going to men. And so now we've got, it used to be a few years ago, getting women introduced into STEM careers, right? Now it seems to be more the crypto, the blockchain, kind of the development side of things. So there are opportunities not only to invest your personal finances into that space, but also your career and where you put your career equity. And I think that is such an interesting dynamic. And there are some really cool women out there doing some really cool things in crypto and digital assets. But I do want to put that on people's radar, because I don't think that is something that is often talked about, in addition to just the investing part, because we can all get on Coinbase and we can all open an account, right? But what about thinking about what that means for our careers? The other thing that I've noticed, especially in the last six to 12 months, so a lot of the people that I'm talking to as a financial therapist are couples who are coming into disagreement on whether or not they want to invest in cryptocurrencies or digital assets. Usually one partner is wanting to invest in crypto and one is not, because one is scared. One has heard certain things. There are certain misconceptions. And so there's really a lot at play here. And I think that just lends itself to some really interesting conversations, again, from that career perspective, that relationship perspective, and how you look at your investments, right? And looking at just in general the trajectory of digital assets like Bitcoin. Let's go back to the original, Bitcoin. I don't know if you want to add something in the chat about whether or not you're familiar with what Bitcoin is or what digital assets are in general. That would be awesome for me to see. But Bitcoin really in and of itself is a store of value. So we hear about Bitcoin, we hear about Dogecoin. You have some digital assets. Maggie, what kind of digital assets do you have?
I have Bitcoin. I did throw 20 or 30 bucks at the Dogecoin, and then some other couple random things. They're all tanking, but I call it my fun money, and I am just writing it out and just using it for an experiment.
Absolutely. And I think that is the coolest thing. And one of my recommendations actually is to use this as kind of an experimental time. I really think it is interesting. And most women I talk to are using this as a time to get into it and take a look at it and get a feel for what this looks like. Again, when we've got these barriers kind of removed a little bit, it makes it easier to, Maria, thank you. I'm experimenting with Bitcoin. I'm trying to learn. We're trying to learn those patterns, what it does. We have all of these historical records of the stock market, right? We can track and we can see how things go up and down and how they move. And we don't have that with Bitcoin or other digital assets. We're starting to see those patterns, but what we see with Bitcoin is up and down and up and down and up and down. Stock market is, very similar in that regard, But because Bitcoin and other digital assets don't really have, I think, what most would consider a valid use right now, right? What's going to happen with them? And that, I think, is the frightening thing for people, the scary thing. Is this something I want to get involved in? Or is this something I kind of want to sit on the sidelines about? And I think a lot of what drives investing in digital assets is the concept of FOMO, the fear of missing out, right? And I think for women especially, I think that's very, maybe triggering isn't the right word, but I think it is somewhat triggering in the sense that we, in the financial system, we have an opportunity to get into an investing platform or investing, asset class that could give us financial freedom. And I work with quite a few people, like in South Korea, for example. And in South Korea, it's very difficult for young people, especially, to invest in real estate or even like traditional, stock assets equity assets like we would think, because the barrier to entry is so high. It's impossibly high. And so digital asset investing is extremely popular in countries like South Korea for younger people, because it is really the only thing that is accessible. And so we're starting to see that, and we're starting to see that trickle, here into the United States quite a bit. And we've gotten some, obviously, media attention. We've got, Elon Musk last summer had a heyday with Dogecoin. And I think people really got very fascinated by Dogecoin. And I think that was probably one of the more, just visible cases of FOMO that just went kind of viral for a couple months there. People are taking out second mortgages on their house to buy Dogecoin. That's shocking. That is shocking to me. That is a highly speculative move. That's like buying on margin. I don't recommend it. What I do recommend is thinking of things like Maggie said, a little bit of fun money. As we are starting to learn about crypto, and I think that is the biggest thing that women can do for themselves right now, is to get real intimate and familiar with this space and practice and try a little bit, and to start to see what is familiar and what is comfortable and what those patterns look like. And again, I'm not a paid sponsor for Coinbase or Gemini or anything like that. I use Coinbase personally because I find it just really easy to use. But just starting to put a little bit of money into some of these projects that are of interest to you. And that's the other thing I think we need to think about, when we're talking about the history of Bitcoin. Like, what is the use of Bitcoin? What do you do with it? Bitcoin has now been really compared to, what used to be the gold standard. So Bitcoin is really kind of predicted at this point to be the kind of the North Star of other crypto and digital assets. What is going to kind of guide it and kind of back it. Issue with that is a lot of people are obviously very critical of Bitcoin, very slow to adopt Bitcoin as a currency. The most recent use case that I think is notable is the El Salvadorian government's adoption of Bitcoin as a currency. It is an amazing project. It has, at least in, from what I've been able to see, been a relatively large success. Not so much maybe in the day-to-day operations of people who are living in El Salvador, but there are a lot of people that are from El Salvador that don't live in El Salvador and send money home to people using Bitcoin. And that has been a really big deal and very, very good. But with those types of adoptions, we also have to think about who's going to lose out and who might be concerned about traditional finance structures crumbling as a result. So, there's legislation, related to El Salvador, United States legislation. There's, talk of, the IRS has already started, placing limitations on, I wouldn't say limitations, but they're watching it from a tax perspective. A few years ago, they started adding to your 1040, have you invested in crypto? And if you have, we want to see your 1099. We want to see your gains and losses. So there's an eye on this. And so we are talking about a complete shift, not only in the way we invest money, but in the way our governments have been formed, in the way we have built and constructed our entire financial system, and is freakishly scary for many people. And a lot of people in power, as we know, can do some pretty powerful things to block things when they're scared. And then they create scary things for people. And I think this is a living case example of that. And I've said this before. I know I've talked to Maggie about this. I think I said this when I talked to her last. So I think at some point, 5, 6, 10 years from now, we're going to look back at 2022 as a year where our financial system and everything changed, where everything in our lives, especially as women, changed. And I'm sorry for getting a little bit emotional here, but it's been an emotional week. And, Maggie says in the chat here, I love how crypto can be a universal payment. That is the appeal of it. It is the speed in which things can happen. It is a immediate transfer. It is something that can be controlled directly without a third party interference. And that is the thing that Bitcoin historically was built upon, was this idea that we don't need a middleman. We don't need a third party. We don't need a bank or someone in between to charge us a fee and transact this on our behalf because of a regulation. And of course, going back to that kind of fear aspect, from the financial therapy side of things, we have the fear of FOMO on our side of missing out on, potentially making good investments in Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of these other tokens that, are of interest to us. But there's the fear on the other side of that, is the fear of, well, what happens if, we can't charge fees and, the Federal Reserve crumbles and, Wall Street burns to hell, all of these things, and people are terrified of that. And so when there is that much fear involved, the adoption of something like this is a complete paradigm shift in the way we operate in all aspects of our lives. And that's why I find this space so very interesting to watch. And, I obviously was part of the Great Resignation. I mean, I left a very secure, stable university professor job to do this and to advocate on behalf of crypto and Bitcoin and blockchain technology. And you would be surprised how many people thought I was absolutely crazy. Like, why would you do that? Because I believe that this shift is here. If it's not this, it's going to be something else, because this is not sustainable. This is not working. And the fact that it is creating this much fear and this much interest, I'm a big believer that where there is smoke, there is fire. And I believe that there's going to be a lot of fire here. And I believe that fire is going to be in the hands of women who make that decision to choose themselves over everything else. I want you to choose yourself at all times, but that's really hard for a lot of us to do. But choose to get involved in looking at crypto and other digital assets as a way to preserve your financial freedom in the presence of fear, because there is a lot of fear here. And approaching crypto and blockchain from a career perspective, a relationship perspective, and an investing perspective, I think is one of the most fearless things a woman can do. Even if it all goes to hell, the fact that you showed up for yourself to learn about something that is scary. I was intimidated, so scared, so frightened about it. But there's enough that has happened in the last 3 years that made me quit my job to say there is way too much smoke here. There's going to be a fire. And women are going to burn it down. Because that's what we do. When we are empowered, that's what happens. And we have an opportunity to advocate for each other in this space more than we can in the traditional financial system. But we have to get in early on that. And I'm not meaning that from an investing perspective. We have to get on the blockchain train. It sounds so cliche, but I like it. The blockchain train. I want us to get on that train together and start learning about it and not being passive in the way we approach how we are, dealing with that. And I think one of the things we really have to focus on, a question just came in, what other resources do you recommend to learn more? when I say get on the blockchain train or get on, kind of this crypto movement, if you will, what I want women most to do is to look at the use cases behind these coins, these tokens, these assets. These, and digital assets can be anywhere from, Bitcoin to Ethereum to any of those things. But we are very much also interested in the use cases behind what these tokens are, purporting to do. Dogecoin, for example, it might be used, I think, by the Dallas Mavericks. I think you can buy stuff there. Bitcoin is becoming a little bit more widely accepted. But going back to the El Salvador example, I'll give you a really good example of this. The ability of El Salvador to offer Bitcoin to its residents was built on a blockchain called Algorand. Algorand offers its own token called Algo. And so you want to look at these roadmaps, and most any coin has them. You need to be aware of, some of the things to look at when you're looking at these roadmaps. If you're not aware who's involved in the project, if they're kind of scarce, if they look a little weird, that is not a project I would invest in. But I want you to dig deep into those roadmaps, and I want you to look at those coins that are being offered with a very keen eye, like much like you would, read a prospectus, for a particular stock or a mutual fund, right? But get really familiar with that and make sure it's something that speaks to you. I generally don't recommend investing with your gut or your intuition. I want you to, come at it with a clear head. But as women, I do believe we have a certain gift. I really do. And I do believe in a female's intuition. And I believe that female's intuition is even more powerful when we add research and an objective lens to it. So that is certainly something I would definitely recommend. And part of that, and most of that, is meant for us to be able to close that gap that exists and get us front and center when this fire starts. So I would be happy to.